These are the smallest inside cabins found on cruise ships. From the cheapest to the most expensive, I'm gonna stay in them all. Starting with an inside cabin from one of the biggest cruise lines in the world, Carnival Cruise Line. I'd read a lot of bad reviews about the inside cabins on board the Carnival Magic, but when I saw a cruise for just $76 per night, I knew that I had to give it a go. To keep it as cheap as possible, I didn't pick the location of my room, and that meant that I could be given a cabin anywhere on the ship. Probably one of the cabins that nobody else picked in one of the bad locations. I was given cabin 7432 right at the back of deck 7, above a nightclub and a piano bar. I hope that this wouldn't cause me any problems as the cruise went on, as cruise ship cabins aren't exactly known for being soundproof. You can hear everything. Walking in the room, I was instantly struck by how funky it looked, and I think funky is the right word because there was a lot of orange wood around, the floor was bright, and even the bed had a skirt. The desk reminded me of spaghetti hoops, and I have no idea what the art on the walls was, but it was on both sides, the same painting twice. Clearly whoever made this thought that this was a good painting and they just ordered thousands and thousands and thousands of copies of it. Inside cabins are usually around half the size of hotel rooms in the US, and they can hold up to 4 people, normally in beds that come down from the ceiling. I have done that in the past, but I was very happy that there were just 2 of us sharing this room, especially since every night we did end up playing a game of what is that song as we lay in bed listening to this music that was far away. It didn't keep me awake, but it definitely would some people. In the bathroom, I found the thinnest toilet paper in the world. I was really impressed by how they could make it so thin, but apart from that, the bathroom was perfectly fine. There was a shower curtain, which was a little bit annoying, but the shower was good and the bathroom was in keeping with the rest of the design, let's say. The floor was a dark blue and the rest of the room was white and green. The ship was actually built in 2008, so you would expect the design to be a bit dated, but that wasn't the case in the next inside cabin I stayed in, built in the year 2000. Looking at the website for the Norwegian Sun, the cabins definitely looked old. This very much looked like a 2000 TV, but coming in at $126 per person per night, I decided to book 8 days on board. I figured the cabins must have had lots of updates since the launch. I was given cabin 7314 right at the front of deck 7, and the cabin was between an art gallery and a kids club. It wasn't a location that I would have picked, but I did see that we were very close to a bar, which I thought would be good, even if we might end up having kids running up and down the corridor. Walking into the cabin, I was very impressed with the design. It didn't feel dated at all, and we even had a sofa, which is a nice treat for an inside cabin. It was obvious that the cabin had been updated since the launch, as we had USBs in the lamps and there wasn't a 2000s TV anywhere to be found, just a more modern one. Originally, these cabins had bright green floors, and it is much more subtle in design now. There were a few old signs around, like this very old hairdryer, but overall it felt very spacious and there was lots and lots of storage. In reality, a cruise ship cabin is only around 9 foot wide, which is similar in width to a bus, and it is pretty similar to a shipping container. It is strange to think about it like that. I was living in a shipping container for a week, basically, a very nice one. I saw that the life jackets were up here and I decided not to blow the whistle. You might think that one is obvious, but I have seen so many people put the whistles in their mouths, and you have no idea when that was last cleaned, if that was ever cleaned. Don't put it in your mouth. The bathroom was a pretty decent size and it was a strange curved shape. It definitely felt like being in a spaceship or a plane, but it was not the smallest bathroom on a ship that I've had by a long shot. Interestingly, probably the worst inside cabin I've had was also the most expensive, but more about that later. Because of the position of the air conditioning in this cabin, it definitely did feel like sleeping in a draft. In the middle of the night, I would wake up with the air hitting me in the face, but I would much prefer that to one where the air conditioning doesn't work, like in the next cabin I stayed in. On a mainstream cruise line, it's pretty typical to find that 1/3 or more of the cabins are inside the ship. That can often mean thousands and thousands of inside cabins on the big ships, but on board the Azamara Onward, there were only 23 inside cabins on the entire ship. Azamara are a luxury cruise line, so when I saw a deal come up for $132 per person per night, I thought this was my chance. I didn't pick my cabin location, again to save money, but I knew that we could only be on decks 4, 6, 7 or 8, and most of the inside cabins were in the middle. We were given cabin 7069 off an internal corridor, which meant that nobody ever came down there, which would be important later. When we entered the cabin, I was very impressed with the design. It looked luxurious, and even though the ship is advertised as Azamara's new ship, she was actually built in 1999. It isn't uncommon for cruise lines to sell their ships to different lines. The trend at the moment really is to build bigger and bigger cruise ships, so the older ones do get passed down. There were a lot of mirrors in the cabin and a nice sofa. There was also a mini bar that was included included, which is absolutely fabulous. Sadly, the nice sofa meant that we lost space in the bathroom, and the bathroom was the smallest that I've ever had on a cruise ship. The shower in particular was really tiny, and I just about managed it. If anyone is taller or wider than me, it would be a real struggle, which does explain a lot of the reviews that describe it as unusable. You might think that a luxury line like this would want to change the bathrooms, but because of the way that cruise ship cabins are made completely formed and then slid into the side of the cruise ship, they really can't do that. They do sometimes cut cruise ships in half and add new sections to the middle, but they can't just make the bathrooms bigger. The carpet on the website looked like someone had dragged mud or something worse through the room, but in reality it was much nicer. That was good because I did spend a lot of time down on the floor with the door propped open so that I could use the 4G when we were in port. I didn't pay for Wi-Fi, again to keep the cost down. This door was actually quite musical and it would whistle really quite loudly. It turned out that we had a problem with our air conditioning and it basically just put us in this vortex of air. They did come late one night and they turned off the air conditioning so that we could sleep. It was difficult to explain the problem, so I recorded the sound so that I could play it at reception when I went to report the problem. I'm going to play the sound for you now, so make sure there's no dogs or anything around because I don't think they'll like it. Despite the small bathroom and the air conditioning problems, I was very happy with the price that we paid for such a luxurious cruise line. The cabin was comfortable, and in the past I have paid more for an inside cabin on a mainstream cruise line, as I did with my inside cabin on board the Queen Mary 2. Coming in at $152 per person per night, my stay on the Cunard ship was more expensive than I would have liked, but Queen Mary 2 is the last ocean liner in the world, and I knew that I had to get on board to see what the difference was. From the website, it looked as though our cabin would be sliding down a hill, but I'm very happy to say that it wasn't, and we were assigned cabin 6198. I actually did find a giant bra in one of the other cabins. It had clearly fallen down the back of one of the drawers and I just put it in the bin. I didn't have much hope that I would be able to reunite it with its owner. The cabin felt spacious and there was a lot of storage. Usually I would say that doesn't matter too much in an inside cabin, especially if there's just two people sharing the space, but we were cruising with Cunard, who are the most formal cruise line. I had to bring lots of dresses and the wardrobe space was appreciated. I did also stay in an inside cabin when I took a 90s themed cruise. I had this cabin all to myself and I needed it for my fancy dress costumes. If you can work out who I am in any of these pictures, let me know in the comments. This cruise was just so much fun. Your Britishism of the week is the phrase fancy dress, and fancy dress is when you go to a party and you dress up as a famous person or a famous thing. This is fancy dress and this isn't. This is a fancy dress, but it's not fancy dress. It's different. There are a few other British touches like the UK plug sockets and the kettles. It's very rare to find UK sockets on cruise ships, usually it's just the US or the European type, so I always bring my universal adapter. You can find that one on this link. On this cruise, I was also cruising with friends who stayed in a balcony cabin, so I had a direct comparison. The balcony upgrade was only an extra $120 per person for the 3-day cruise, but I'm still glad that I saved the money. Cunard do offer free room service, which most cruise lines do not. I decided to make the most out of it by ordering it once, but that definitely would have been more fun in a balcony cabin. Having said that, the best room service I've ever had was in an inside cabin. I flew from London to Barbados to board the MSC Seaview in the middle of the night. I ordered a pizza because I was exhausted by the time we got there and it tasted so good. It was worth every penny. The layout of the cabin was pretty standard, but the same can't be said for all inside cabins. Take the inside cabin on board the Havila Polaris, for example. All inside cabins on this ship have 2 bunk beds and they have a much smaller footprint than normal. There wasn't much storage in here, but luckily the next inside cabin that I stayed in had much more. Ambassador's Ambience was built in 1991 and the cruise that I took cost $179 per night. The ship was bought from P&O Australia and I don't think that the cabins have changed much, if at all, in that time. We were assigned cabin 9248 and I thought that the layout was great. Having a separate storage and dressing area made the cabin feel much bigger, and we were only planning on being on board for 3 nights, so we didn't have a lot of stuff. In reality, we didn't end up staying that long through no fault of our own. Behind the bed was a curtain that went nowhere, and you could almost imagine that there was a window there if you pretended, but there definitely wasn't. The same way that I pretend that the sunrise is real when I use a daylight alarm clock in these cabins so that I don't wake up in the pitch black. I should have put it behind the curtain actually, that would have been genius. Didn't think of that. We unpacked, but I avoided the drawers with the gross looking handles. It wouldn't have cost a lot to fix a few grubby little things like this and the tap, but for some reason Ambassador just didn't. It is a bit of a strange one. The drawer handles were just the start of our issues on this cruise. We were actually at dinner when they made an announcement that said that our cruise had been cancelled. It was cancelled while we were sat right there. We were between our starter and our main, and it was very, very bizarre. This video explains more, so I'll see you there next.